Welcome to Faith in Context, a look at biblical faith in the context of daily life, with Dr. Jack Parrott.
Is there such a thing as right and wrong? A century ago, one writer said, if God doesn't exist, everything is permitted. We're living in a day when the individual is king. We're told that if it makes you happy, if it gives you self-fulfillment, it's good, it's right, do it. Some of us were raised by parents who taught us there's a difference between right and wrong. We were given rewards for doing good, and we were held accountable when we did wrong. Even as we grew, we were a part of groups or clubs or family groups that encouraged a certain kind of value system. Now, some of those very values are being challenged. Some of the things that we were taught to be right are now said to be wrong. And some of the things that we were taught were wrong are now said to be right. It's a very confusing time. We're looking for direction. We look to our families. Some people look to social groups. Others look to the government. Even Paul says in Romans chapter 13 that the government has a role to play to keep order, to benefit the good, and to punish the evil. So the government has certain rules. It says murder or stealing, things like that, they're wrong, and you're going to be punished if you do them. And the government is supposed to reward people for doing the good. But times are changing. Even the rules of the government are changing. It's just such a confusing time. Ultimately, God is the only source that we can turn to that is unchanging. C.S. Lewis said, there is but one good, and that is God. And everything else is good when it looks to Him, and bad when it turns from Him. When we turn to God and we look in His Word, the Bible gives us many teachings about what is good and acceptable, and quite frankly, what is wrong and to be avoided. In the Old Testament, when we go to Exodus or Leviticus or Deuteronomy, they're codes of behavior. One of the most familiar is the Ten Commandments. When we go to the New Testament, the teaching of Paul is filled with instructions of how people ought to live together and how families ought to live together. And of course, the teachings of Jesus are just filled with teachings about how to live as God-honoring people. One of the most familiar is his Sermon on the Mount, where he talks about living in relationship with other people and with God. Ultimately, our source as Christ followers is Jesus Christ Himself. We look to Him, we study His life, we listen to His teaching, and we apply those to our own lifestyle. They guide us in our decision making. James says, whoever knows to do right and does wrong is a sinner. That's a mistake that we ought to avoid. We ought to look at Jesus and follow Him. But here's the question I have. Who is going to teach our children right and wrong? Some say the government. I don't think that's a good idea. Some say the schools. Probably not such a good idea. Or the church. Maybe a better idea. But you know what the Bible says? The Bible says parents are going to teach their children about right and wrong. And maybe that responsibility also expands to grandparents and other family members. I want to encourage you today. Think about right and wrong in your own life, but also think about how you can help children and grandchildren to know the difference between what's right and what's wrong. I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, God bless.
Thank you for watching today. Help others see Faith in Context by pressing the like and share buttons on Facebook.